Live from the BDN Studios, it's Bang and Dang.
That's awesome.
If you don't like that, then
You ain't black.
There we go, back for more battles of the American Civil War, behind the battles. And since we covered the old CSS Virginia last week and had run-in with the USS Monitor, when the first ever battle between two ironclads in the world, might as well take a look at the USS Monitor now. And this is a way longer story because it lasted a little bit longer. Other battles besides Hampton Roads.
oh,
Or Hampton, whatever it was, Hampton Roads.
yeah, Hampton Roads.
Yeah. As soon as the CSS took and built the Virginia, these guys were like, well, we need to do something here.
Right.
Obviously, fought the Virginia at the Battle of Hampton Roads.
Used to be the Merrimack,
Used to be the Merrimack with a K, sometimes spelled only with a C.
just like Mackinac.
Right, Mackinac.
Mackinac.
Mackinac. Well, why the concept of ships protected by armor existed before the advent of the Monitor, clearly.
Right.
The need for iron plating on ship arose only after the explosive shell-firing Paxson's guns were introduced in the 1820s. Use of heavy iron plating on the sides of warships was not practical until steam propulsion matured enough to carry its great weight.
Right.
Yeah, you're not getting no.
Right.
Developments in gun technology had progressed by the 40s of 1800s so that no practical thickness of wood could withstand the power of a shell anyways. Thick boy, but still going to get busted up.
In response, the United States began construction of 1854 of a steam-powered ironclad warship, Stevens Battery. But work was delayed, and the designer, Robert Stevens, he died in 1856 while stalling further work. Oh, well.
Basically what the Monitor looks like.
You know, since there was no pressing need for such a ship at that time, there was little demand to continue work on the unfinished vessel. They're like, that's nice and all, but we got better things to do. It was France that said, you know what? I'm going to introduce the first operational armored ship, as well as the first shell guns and rifled cannons, too. But the change this war.
Right.
War-torn world.
Well, experience during the Crimean War of 1854 to 55 showed that armored ships could withstand repeated hits without significant damage when the French ironclad floating batteries defeated Russian coastal fortifications during the Battle of Kinburn. French Emperor Napoleon III was sent a proposal for a Monitor-type design with a gun turret in September of 1854.
Okay.
But no record of any such submission could be found in the archives of the French Ministry of the Navy. That's when they were searched by naval historian James Finney Baxter III.
Oh. Well, the French then followed those ships with the first ocean-going ironclad, the armored frigate Gloria, in 1859, and the British responded with, guess what? We got the HMS Warrior, baby.
Cool.
The Union Navy's attitude towards ironclads changed quickly when it was learned that the old Confederates were converting the captured Merrimack to an ironclad at the Naval Shipyard in Norfolk, Virginia. Subsequently, the urgency of the Monitor's completion and deployment to Hampton Roads was driven by fears of what the Confederate ironclad, now renamed Virginia, would be capable of doing, not only to Union ships, but to cities along the coast and riverfronts. And they can do some damage.
Northern newspapers published daily accounts of the Confederates' progress in converting the Merrimack to an ironclad. Oh, really? This prompted the Union Navy to complete and deploy Monitor as soon as possible. Word of Merrimack's reconstruction and conversion was confirmed in the North in late February of 1862 when Mary Louvestre of Norfolk, who was a freed slave who worked as a housekeeper for one of the Confederate engineers working on Merrimack, well, she made her way through Confederate lines with news that the Confederates were building an ironclad. She said, you boys better get on top of your game because they're about to mess you up.
Oh, shit. Concealed in her dress was a message from a Union sympathizer who worked in the Navy Yard. He was warning that the former Merrimack, renamed Virginia by the Confederates, was nearing completion, about to wreak havoc on you Yankees. Upon her arrival in Washington, Louvestre managed to meet with Secretary of Navy Gideon Wells and informed him that the old rebels were nearing the completion of her ironclad, which surprised Wells. He was like, what? Convinced by the papers Louvestre was carrying, he had production of Monitor sped up. He said, you mean you got this shit done? Wells later recorded in his memoirs that Mrs. Louvestre encountered no small risk in bringing this information.
Yeah, probably would have been killed. After the United States received word of the construction of Virginia, Congress appropriated $1.5 million on August 3rd, 1861, to build one or more armored steamships. It also ordered the creation of a board to inquire into the various designs proposed for the armored ships. The Union Navy advertised for proposals for ironclad steam vessels of war on August 7th, and Wells appointed 3 senior officers as the ironclad board the following day.
Okay.
Their task was to examine plans for the completion of ironclad vessels, clearly, and consider its costs.
Swedish-born engineer John Ericsson originally made no submission to the board, but became involved when Cornelius Bushnell, the sponsor of the proposal that became the armored sloop USS Galena, needed to have his design reviewed by a naval constructor. So you gotta review this, bud. The board required a guarantee from Bushnell that his ship would float despite the weight of its armor. Cornelius H.D. Lammeter of New York City recommended that Bushnell consult with his friend, old Johnny Boy Erickson. The two met on the 9th of September and then again the next day, after Erickson had time to evaluate Galena's design.
Well, during this second meeting, Erickson showed Bushnell a model of his own design, which would become the future Monitor. It's derived from his 1854 design.
He's like, this is nice, but check this out.
Right.
Bushnell's like, oh, damn.
Bushnell got Erickson's permission to show the model to Wells, who then told Bushnell to show it to the board. Upon review of Erickson's unusual design, the board was skeptical. It was concerned that such a vessel would not float, especially in rough seas, and rejected the proposal of a completely iron-laden ship. President Lincoln, who had also examined the design, overruled them, though. He said, we need it.
Oh, wow. Well, Erickson assured the board his ship, it will float. He said, the sea shall ride over her, and she shall live in it like a duck. On the 15th of September, after further deliberations, the board accepted Erickson's proposal. The ironclad board evaluated 17 different designs, but recommended only 3 on the 16th of September, including Erickson's Monitor design.
Well, the 3 that were selected differed substantially in design and degree of risk.
Oh, what was the risk?
Monitor was the most innovative design by virtue of its low freeboard, shallow draft iron hull, and total dependence on steam power. The riskiest element of its design was its rotating gun turret, something that had not previously been tested by any Navy.
Oh.
Erickson's guarantee of delivery in 100 days proved to be decisive in choosing his design, despite the risk. So we need it as fast as possible, I guess.
Right. Well, okay. Well, the Monitor was an unusual vessel, almost every respect, and was sometimes sarcastically described by the press and other critics as Ericsson's folly. A cheese box on a raft, and the Yankee cheese box. The most prominent feature on this vessel was a large cylindrical gun turret mounted amidships, above the low freeboard upper hull, also called the raft. This extended well past the sides of the lower, more traditionally shaped hull. A small armored pilot house was fitted on the upper deck towards the bow. However, its position prevented Monitor from firing her guns straight forward.
Well, that could be problematic.
Maybe.
One of Ericsson's prime goals in designing the ship was to present the smallest possible target to enemy gunfire. The ship was 179 feet long overall, had a beam of 41 feet 6 inches, and had a maximum draft of 10 feet 6 inches. Monitor had a tonnage of 776 tons burthen and displaced 987 long tons, which is 1,003 tons. Her crew consisted of 49 officers, none of them weighed a ton, and enlisted men. The ship was powered by a single-cylinder horizontal vibrating lever steam engine, also designed by Ericsson, which drove a 9-foot propeller, whose shaft was 9 inches in diameter.
The engine used steam, generated by 2 horizontal fire tube boilers, at a maximum pressure of 40 psi. The 320 indicated horsepower engine was designed to give the ship a top speed of 8 knots, or 9.2 miles per hour.
Jeez.
But the Monitor was 1 to 2 knots slower in service, which is about...
So only went about 7 miles an hour.
Yeah, wow. The engine had a bore of 36 inches and a stroke of 22 inches. The ship carried 100 long tons of coal. Ventilation for the vessel was supplied by 2 centrifugal blowers near the stern, each of which were powered by, and you guessed it, 6 horsepower steam engines, baby.
Jeez. Well, one fan circulated air throughout the ship, but the other one forced air through the boilers, which depended on this forced draft. Leather belts connected the blowers to the engines, and they would stretch when wet, often disabling the fans in the boilers. Well,
Yeah.
that's not good. Ship's pumps were steam operated, and water would accumulate in the ship if the pumps could not get enough steam to work. Okay. Doesn't sound like it's too good of a plan to me.
Right. Monitor's turret measured 20 feet in a diameter and 9 feet high, constructed with 8 inches of armor, 11 inches in front at the gun ports, though, rendering the overall vessel somewhat top-heavy. Its rounded shape helped to deflect cannon shot. A pair of steam-powered donkey engines rotated the turret through a set of gears. A full rotation was made in 22 and a half seconds during the testing on the 9th of February, 1862.
It's a long time.
Yeah.
Fine control of the turret proved to be difficult, as there was no brake. The steam engines would have to be placed in reverse if the turret overshot its mark, or another full rotation would have to be made.
Oh, shit.
The only way to see out of the turret was through the gun ports. When the guns were not in use or withdrawn for reloading during battle, heavy iron port stoppers would swing down into place to close the gun port.
It's a floating submarine.
Basically.
Including the guns, the turret weighed approximately 160 tons.
Long tons.
Wow. The entire weight rested on an iron spindle that had to be jacked up using a wedge before the turret could rotate. The spindle was 9 inches in the diameter, which gave it 10 times the strength needed in preventing the turret from sliding sideways. When not in use, the turret rested on a brass ring on the deck that was intended to form a watertight seal. In service, however, this proved to leak heavily despite caulking by the crew. Nothing you can do.
Jeez. The gap between the turret and the deck proved to be a problem as debris and shell fragments entered the gap and jammed the turrets of several Passaic-class monitors, which used the same turret design during the First Battle of Charleston Harbor, April 1863. Direct hits on the turret with heavy shot could bend the spindle, which could also jam the turret.
Damn right.
To gain access to the turret from below or to hoist up the powder and shot during battle, the turret had to rotate to face starboard and would line up the entry hatch to the floor of the turret with an opening in the deck below. The roof of the turret was lightly built to facilitate any needed exchange of the ship's guns and to improve ventilation, with only gravity holding the roof plates in place.
Oh, shit.
Jeez.
Wow. The turret was intended to mount a pair of 15-inch smoothbore Dahlgren guns, but they were not ready in time. So they went with 11-inch guns for a substitute, weighing approximately 16,000 pounds each. Monitor's guns used the standard propellant charge of 15 pounds, specified by the 1860 ordinance for targets distant, near, or ordinary, and established by the gun's designer Dahlgren himself. They could fire a 136-pound round shot or shell up to a range of 3,650 yards and an elevation of 15 degrees. Ooh.
Up, right. It's crazy.
Damn.
The top of the armored deck was only about 18 inches above the waterline. It was protected by 2 layers of half-inch wrought iron armor. The sides of the raft consisted of 3 to 5 layers of 1-inch iron plates, backed by about 30 inches of pine and oak. 3 of the plates extended to the full 60-inch height of the side, but the 2 innermost plates did not extend all the way down. That's okay. Erickson originally intended to use either 6 1-inch plates or a single outer 4-inch plate backed by 3 3/4-inch plates, but the thicker plate required too much time to roll.
The 2 innermost plates were riveted together while the
Riveting.
outer... Right? What? No, so riveting, huh? Right. The 2 innermost plates were riveted together. The 2 innermost plates were riveted together, while the outer plates were bolted to the inner ones. A 9th plate, only 3/4 inch thick, 15 inches wide, was bolted over the butt notes. What? Was bolted over the...
That's what I'm going to call farts from now on, the butt note.
That's a butt note. It was bolted... It was bolted over the butt joints of the innermost layer of armor. Glass portholes in the deck provided natural light for the interior of the ship. In action, these were covered by iron plates. After the duel between the 2 ironclads at Hampton Roads, there was concern by some Navy officials who witnessed the battle that the Monitor's design might allow for easy boarding by the Confederates, probably.
On a letter dated 27th April 1862, Lieutenant Commander O.C. Badger wrote to Lieutenant H.A. Wise, who was Assistant Inspector of Ordnance, advising the use of liquid fire, scalding water from the boiler through hoses and pipes, sprayed out via the vents and pilot house window to repel enemy boarders. All right. Wise, who was aboard and inspected Monitor after the battle, responded in a letter, April 30th, 1862. He says, "With reference to the Monitor, the moment I jumped on board of her after the fight, I saw that a steam tug with 20 men could have taken the upper part of hers in as many seconds.
All right.
I hear that hot water pipes are arranged so as to scald the assailants when they may dare to set foot on her. The chance to employ such a tactic never arose. Damn, they were waiting. There are conflicting accounts as to whether such an anti-personnel provision was even installed.
All right. Probably not. Commodore.
They were probably just there because there's probably steam shit everywhere. You could probably just take it off and spray somebody.
Right. Commodore and Joseph Smith, chief of the Bureau of Yards and Docks, sent Erickson formal notice of the acceptance of his proposal on the 21st of September, 1861. 6 days later, Erickson signed a contract with Bushnell, John Winslow, and John Griswold. Sparky, which stated that the four partners would equally share in the profits or the losses incurred by the construction of the ironclad. There was one major delay over the signing of the actual contract with the government. Damn government always got to make everything worse. Wells insisted that if the Monitor did not prove to be a complete success, the builders would have to refund every cent to the old government.
Oh. Well, Winslow balked at this draconian provision and had to be persuaded by his partners to sign after the Navy rejected his attempt to amend the contract.
Oh.
The contract was signed October 4th for the price of $275,000 to be paid in installments as work progressed.
Yeah, don't give them all at once.
Preliminary work had begun well before that date, though, and Erickson's consortium contracted with Thomas Rowland of the Continental Iron Works at Bushwick Inlet, which is in modern-day Greenpoint, Brooklyn.
Oh, fantastic.
That happened October 25th for construction of Monitor's hull. Her keel was laid the same day.
Look at these guys. It's on the move, baby. The turret was built and assembled at the Novelty Iron Works in Manhattan, disassembled and shipped to Bushwick, where it was reassembled again. The ship's steam engines and machinery were constructed at the De Latimer Iron Works, also in Manhattan. Chief Engineer Alban Steimers, who once served aboard the Merrimack, was appointed superintendent of the ship while she was undergoing construction. Oh, look at that. Good for him. Although never formally assigned to the crew, he remained aboard her as an inspector during her maiden voyage and the battle.
Construction progressed in fits and starts, plagued by a number of short delays in the delivery of iron and occasional shortage of cash, but they did not delay the ship's progress by more than a few weeks. The 100 days allotted for her construction passed January 12th, but the Navy chose not to penalize the consortium. The name Monitor, meaning one who admonishes and corrects wrongdoers. It was proposed by Erickson on January 20th, 1862, and approved by Assistant Secretary of Navy Gustavus Fox.
Okay.
I like it.
All right. While Erickson stood on its deck in defiance of all his critics who thought she would never float, the Monitor was launched on the 30th of January, 1862. To the cheers of the watching crowd, even those who had bet that the ship would sink straight to the bottom. And he commissioned...
Imagine if it did.
Right. And the ship was commissioned on the 25th of February, 1862. Even before Monitor was commissioned, she ran an unsuccessful set of sea trials on the 19th of February. Valve problems with the main engine and one of the fan engines prevented her from reaching the Brooklyn Navy Yard from Bushwick Inlet.
Well, these issues were easily fixed. The Monitor was ordered to sail for Hampton Roads February 26th, but her departure had to be delayed one day to load ammunition.
Damn, it takes a whole day to do it, I guess.
On the morning of February 27th, the ship entered the East River to get ready to leave New York, but proved to be all but unsteerable and had to be towed back to the Navy Yard for 3 days. Upon examination, the steering gear controlling the rudder had been improperly installed.
Oh, shit.
And Rowland offered to realign the rudder, which he estimated to take only a day.
Erickson, however, preferred to revise the steering gear by adding an extra set of pulleys, as he believed it would take less time. His modification proved to be successful when they did the trials on the 4th of March. Gunnery trials were successfully performed the previous day, although Steimers twice nearly caused disasters as he did not even understand how the recoil mechanism worked on the Erickson's carriage for the 11-inch guns. Instead of tightening them to reduce the recoil upon firing, he loosened them so that both guns struck the back of the turret, fortunately without hurting anybody or damaging the guns.
Jeez, take somebody's freaking head off.
Right. Holy shit.
Monitor employed over 40 patented inventions and marked a significant departure from the dominant naval vessels of the time. Erickson's innovative turret design, although not without flaws, facilitated the widespread adoption of rotating guns on warships and navies worldwide.
Oh.
Because the Monitor was an experimental craft, urgently needed, hurriedly constructed, and almost immediately put to sea, A number of problems were discovered during her maiden voyage.
I mean, nothing you knew about it.
And during the battle.
Right.
Right, obviously.
But yet she was still able to challenge the Virginia and prevent her from further destroying the remaining ships in the Union flotilla blockading Hampton Roads. During the boom time of the Civil War, Erickson could have made a fortune with his inventions used in the Monitor, but instead he gave the United States government all his patents, saying it was his contribution to the glorious Union cause.
Well, the original officers at the time of Monitor's commissioning were Lieutenant John Lorimer Warden, who's the commanding officer, Lieutenant Samuel Green, executive officer, acting master was Lewis N. Stoddard, acting master was J.N. Weber, first assistant engineer Isaac Newton Jr., second assistant engineer Albert Campbell, third assistant engineer Robinson Hands, you get these hands, fourth assistant engineer Mark Sundstrom, acting assistant paymaster William Keeler.
Do you think Robinson's middle name is with these?
With these hands?
Robinson
with these hands? Robinson with these hands. Acting assistant paymaster William Keeler and acting assistant surgeon Daniel Lagoo.
Okay. All right. Monitor's crews were all volunteers. In total, 49 officers and enlisted men. The ship required 10 officers, a commander, executive
Everything
officer,
I just said.
4 engineers, 1 medical officer, 2 masters, and a paymaster. Before Warden was allowed to select, assemble, commit to a crew to monitor, the vessel had to be completed, obviously.
Right. You gotta need to know what you need.
Oh, shit. 4 of the officers were line officers. 4 of the officers were line officers and responsible for handling of the vessel and operation of guns during the battle, while the engineering officers were considered a class unto themselves, obviously. We know what their jobs are.
Right. And Monitor's Tourette syndrome. And Monitor's turret, Green and Stoddard supervised loading and firing of the 2 11-inch Dahlgrens. Each gun was crewed by 8 men. Jeez. And why? I guess. Why? And Warden's report, January 27th, 1862 to Wells, he stated he believed 17 men and 2 officers would be the maximum number in the turret that allowed the crew to work without getting in each other's way. How big is this turret? Shit. It's insane.
Decent. Monitor also required petty officers.
Petty motherfuckers.
Among them was Daniel Toffee, Warden's nephew. Warden had selected Toffee to serve as his captain's clerk. 2 black Americans were also among the enlisted men in the crew. Cool. Living quarters for the senior officers consisted of 8 separate well-furnished cabins, each provided with a small oak table and a chair, an oil lamp, shelves, drawers, and a canvas floor covered with a rug.
All right, Dr. Seuss. An oil lamp in a underwater submarine, basically. Not a good idea.
Lighting for each living area was provided by small skylights in the deck above, which were covered by an iron hatch during the battle. The entire crew were given goatskin mats to sleep on.
Awesome.
Nice. Except for the 2 black guys.
Right.
They had to sleep on top of the ship.
Well, the officers' wardroom was located forward of the berth deck, where officers would eat their meals, hold meetings, or socialize during what little spare time they had. It was well furnished with an oriental rug, a large oak table, and other such items. Erickson had personally paid for the cost for all of the officers' furnishings.
Oh, good for him.
Many details of Monitor's history and insights of everyday crew life have been discovered from correspondence sent from the various crew members to family and friends while serving aboard.
Well, that's great. In particular, the correspondence of George Gear, who sent more than 80 letters, often referred to as the Monitor Chronicles. He sent those letters to his wife, Martha.
Seemed like he had a lot of time on his hands.
Right, during the entire time of the Monitor's service, to provide many details and insights into every chapter of the ironclad's short-lived history, offering a rare perspective of a sailor's experience on the naval front during the Civil War. The letters of acting paymaster William Keeler to his dear wife, Anna, also corroborate many of the accounts of affairs that took place aboard the Monitor.
Well, the letters of Gear and Keeler are available for viewing and are housed at the Mariners Museum in Virginia. Other crew members were interviewed later in life, like Lewis Stoddard, one of the last crew members to abandon Monitor minutes before she sank. We'll get to that. He was also the last surviving crew member of Monitor and lived well into the 20th century.
Damn.
You stotter.
Yeah, I don't like it. On the 6th of March, 1862, the Monitor departed New York, bound for Fort Monroe, Virginia, towed by the ocean-going tug Seth Low, and accompanied by the gunboats Currituck and Sachem. Warden, not trusting the seal between the turret and the hull, and ignoring Erickson's advice, wedged the former in the up position and stuffed oakum and sailcloth in the gap. Rising seas that night washed the oakum away, and water poured underneath the turret, as well as through the hawse pipe, various hatches, ventilation pipes, and the 2 funnels. So, the belts for the ventilation and boiler fans loosened and fell off, and the fires in the boilers were nearly extinguished over the course of the next day. This created a toxic atmosphere in the engine room that knocked out most of the engine room crew. Damn.
Yeah, it could have killed him. Jeez. First assistant engineer Isaac Newton, not the inventor guy, ordered the engine room abandoned and had able-bodied crew drag the afflicted engine room hands to the top of the turret where the fresh air could revive them. Both Newton and Steimers worked desperately to get the blowers to work, but they too succumbed to the noxious fumes and were taken above.
Yeah.
One fireman was able to punch a hole in the fan box, drain the water, restart the fan. Later that night, the wheel ropes controlling the ship's rudder jammed, making it nearly impossible to control the ships heading in the rough seas.
Holy shit. Monitor was now in danger of foundering, so Warden signaled Seth Low for help and had Monitor towed to calmer waters, closer to shore, so she was able to restart her engines later that evening. Okay. She rounded Cape Charles around 3 p.m. on the 8th of March and entered Chesapeake Bay, reaching Hampton Roads at 9 p.m., well after the first day's fight in the Battle of Hampton Roads had concluded. We'll be there for tomorrow. We'll be there for tomorrow.
Yeah, well, that day of 8th of March, Virginia, commanded by Commander Franklin Buchanan, he was ready to engage the Union flotilla blockading the James River. Virginia was powered by Merrimac's original engines, which had been condemned by the U.S. Navy before her capture. Ship's chief engineer, H. Ashton Ramsey, he served in the Merrimac before the Civil War broke out and knew of the engine's unreliability, but Buchanan pushed forward undaunted.
All right.
The slow-moving Virginia attacked the Union blockading squadron in Hampton Roads, destroying the sail frigates Cumberland and Congress.
Oh, damn it. Early on in the battle, the steam frigate USS Minnesota ran around.
He's a run around.
Ran aground while attempting to engage the Virginia and remained stranded throughout the very battle. Virginia, however, was unable to attack Minnesota before daylight faded. That day, Buchanan was severely wounded in the leg and was relieved of command by Catesby Roger Jones.
Son of, baby.
Yeah. Days before the battle, a telegraph cable was laid between Fortress Monroe, which overlooked Hampton Roads, and Washington.
Yeah, Washington was immediately informed of the dire situation after the initial battle. Many were now concerned Virginia would put to sea and begin bombarding cities such as New York, while others feared that she would ascend to the Potomac River and attack Washington. In an emergency meeting among Lincoln, Secretary of War Stanton, Secretary Wells, and other senior naval officers, inquiries were made about the Monitor's ability to stop Virginia's prospect of further destruction. So we need to get her in there.
Right. When the temperamental Stanton learned that Monitor had only 2 guns, he expressed contempt and rage as he paced back and forth, further increasing anxiety and despair among attendees of the meeting. Assurances from Admiral Dahlgren and other officers that the Virginia was too massive to effectively approach Washington, and that the Monitor was capable of meeting the challenge gave him no consolation. He's like, I don't know, man.
After further deliberation, Lincoln was finally assured, but Stanton remained almost in a state of terror and sent telegrams to various governors and mayors of the coastal states warning them of the danger. Geez, guy.
Shit.
Subsequently, Stanton approved a plan to load some 60 canal boats with stone and gravel and sink them in the Potomac. But Wells was able to convince Lincoln at the last moment that such a plan would only prevent Monitor and other Union ships from reaching Washington.
Right.
And that barges should only be sunk only if Virginia was able to make her way up the Potomac.
Exactly.
Right, guy. I mean, geez, what is this? Stanton, you need to calm down, dude.
Oh, man. About 9 p.m., Monitor finally arrived on the scene, only to discover the destruction that Virginia had already wrought on the Union fleet. Warden, he was ordered upon reaching Hampton Roads to anchor alongside the USS Roanoke and report to Captain John Marston. Warden was briefed on the situation and received further orders. That orders were to protect the grounded Minnesota. By midnight, under the cover of darkness, the Monitor quietly pulled up alongside and behind the Minnesota and waited.
It's a talented boat, alongside and behind.
Right.
Well, that next morning, about 6 a.m., the Virginia, accompanied by Jamestown, Patrick Henry, and Teaser, they got underway from Sewell's Point to finish off the Minnesota and the rest of the blockaders, but they were delayed from reaching Hampton Roads because of heavy fog until about 8 a.m. In Monitor, Worden was already at his station in the pilot house, while Green took command of the turret. Samuel Howard, acting master of the Minnesota, he was familiar with Hampton Roads with its varying depths and shallow areas. He volunteered to be the pilot the night before and thus was accepted, while Quartermaster Peter Williams steered the vessel throughout the battle. Williams, he was later awarded the Medal of Honor for this act.
Oh.
Now, the speaking tube used to communicate between the pilot house and the turret broke early in the action, so Keeler and Toffee had to relay commands from Worden to Green. As the Virginia approached, she began firing at the Minnesota from more than a mile away, a few of her shells hitting the vessel. When the firing was heard in the distance, Green sent Keeler to the pilot house for permission to open fire as soon as possible. Worden ordered, "Tell Mr. Green not to fire till I give the word, to be cool and deliberate, to take sure aim and not waste a shot."
The Monitor, to the surprise of Virginia's crew, emerged from behind the Minnesota, positioned herself between her and the grounded ship, preventing the old red ironclad from further engaging the vulnerable wooden ship at close range. 8:45 a.m., Worden gave the order to fire. Green fired the first shots of the battle between the two ironclads, which harmlessly deflected off the Confederate ironclad. During the battle, Monitor fired solid shot about once every 8 minutes, while Virginia fired shell exclusively.
The ironclads fought generally at close range for 4 hours, ending at 12:15 p.m., ranging from a few yards to more than 100. Both ships were constantly in motion, maintaining a circular pattern. Because of Virginia's weak engines, great size and weight, and a draft of 22 feet, she was slow and difficult to maneuver, taking her a half an hour to complete a 180-degree turn.
Jeez. During the engagement, the controls of the machinery driving Monitor's turret spindle began to malfunction, making it extremely difficult to turn and stop the turret itself at a given position. So the crew simply let the turret continuously turn and fire their guns on the fly as they bore on the Virginia. The Monitor received several direct hits on the turret, causing some bolts to violently shear off and ricochet around inside. The deafening sound of the impact stunned some of the crew, causing bleeding from their noses and ears. Yeah, you got a big old iron thing getting fucking hit.
However, neither vessel was able to sink or seriously damage the other. At one point, Virginia attempted to ram, but only struck Monitor a glancing blow and did no damage. The collision did, however, aggravate the damage to Virginia's bow from when she previously rammed the Cumberland. Monitor was also unable to do significant damage to the Virginia, possibly because her guns were firing with reduced charges on advice from Commander John Dahlgren, who lacked the preliminary information needed to determine what amount of charge was needed to pierce, dislocate, or dislodge iron plates of various thicknesses and configurations.
Nothing you got. During the battle, Stoddard was stationed at the wheel that controlled the turning of the turret. But at one point, when he was leaning against its side, the turret received a direct hit directly opposite to him, which knocked him clear across the inside, rendering him unconscious. He was taken below to recover and relieved by Steimers. The two vessels were at such close range that they collided 5 times. By 11 a.m., Monitor's supply of shot in the turret had been exhausted.
Oh, no. With one of the gun port covers jammed shut, she hauled off to shallow waters to resupply the turret and repair the damaged hatch, which could not be fixed. During the lull in the battle, Worden climbed through the gun port out onto the deck to get a better view of the overall situation. Should have done that. Virginia, seeing Monitor turn away, turned her attention to the Minnesota and fired shots that set the wooden vessel ablaze, also destroying the nearby tugboat Dragon. When the turret was resupplied with ammo, Worden returned to the battle with only one gun able to fire.
Towards the end of the engagement, Worden directed Williams to steer Monitor around the stern of the Confederate ironclad. Lieutenant Wood fired Virginia's 7-inch brick gun at Monitor's pilot house, striking the forward side directly beneath the sight hole, cracking the structural iron log along the base of the narrow opening just as Worden was peering out. Worden was heard crying out, "My eyes, I'm blind!" Others in the pilot house had also been hit with fragments and were also bleeding.
Temporarily blinded by shell fragments and gunpowder residue from the explosion, and believing the pilot house to be severely damaged, Worden ordered Williams to sheer off into shallow water, where Virginia with her deep draft could not follow. There, the Monitor drifted idly for about 20 minutes. At the time the pilot house was struck, Worden's injury was only known to those in the pilot house and immediately nearby. With Worden severely wounded, command passed to the executive officer Samuel Green. Taken by surprise, he was briefly undecided as what action to take next, but after assessing the damage, soon ordered Monitor to return to battle.
Shortly after, Monitor withdrew. Virginia ran aground, at which time Jones came down from the spar deck to find the gun's crew not returning fire. Jones demanded to know why, and was briefed by Lieutenant Ingleston that the powder was low and precious, and given Monitor's resistance to shot after 2 hours of battle, maintained that the continued firing at that point would be a waste of ammo. Virginia soon managed to break away and headed back towards Norfolk for needed repairs, believing that the Monitor had withdrawn from battle. Green did not pursue. Like Worden, he was under orders to stay and protect Minnesota, an action for which he was later criticized for.
Oh, jeez. As a result of the duel between the two ironclads, Monitor struck 22 times, including 9 hits to the turret and 2 to the pilot house. She had managed to fire 41 shots from her pair of Dahlgren guns. The Virginia sustained 97 indentations to her armor from the fire of the Monitor and other ships. Neither ship sustained any significant damage. In the opinion of Virginia's Commander Jones and her other officers, Monitor could have sunk their ship had she hit the vessel at the waterline.
Strategically, the battle between these two ships was considered the most definitive naval battle of the Civil War. The battle itself was largely considered a draw, though it could be argued Virginia did slightly more damage. Monitor did successfully defend Minnesota and the rest of the Union blockading force, while Virginia was unable to complete the destruction she started the previous day. The battle marked a turning point in the way the naval warfare would be fought in the future for all of the world.
Strategically, though, nothing changed. The Union still controlled Hampton Roads, and the Confederates held several rivers and Norfolk, making it a strategic victory for the North. The Battle of the Ironclads led to what was referred to as Monitor Fever in the North. During the course of the war, improved designs based on the Monitor emerged, and 60 more ironclads were built. Well, I'm sure the Confederates would have done the same thing, but they had nothing.
Immediately following the battle, Steimers telegraphed Erickson, congratulating and thanking him for making it possible to confront the Confederate ironclad and for saving the day. No sooner than Monitor had weighed anchor, numerous small boats and spectators on shore flocked around the ship to congratulate the crew for what they regarded as their victory over Virginia. Assistant Secretary Fox, who observed the entire battle from aboard the Minnesota, came aboard the Monitor and jokingly told her officers, "Well, gentlemen, you don't look as though you just went through one of the greatest naval conflicts on record."
A small tug soon came alongside, and the blinded Worden was brought up from his cabin while crew members and spectators cheered. He was then taken to Fort Monroe for preliminary treatment, then to a hospital in Washington. Steimers and Newton soon began repairing the damage to the pilot house and reconfigured the sides from an upright position to a slope of 30 degrees to deflect shot. During this time, Mrs. Worden personally brought news of her husband's progress and recovery, and was optimistic, informing the crew his eyesight would soon return, but he would be laid up for some time.
Then she informed them that President Lincoln had personally paid Worden a visit, extending his gratitude. Worden was later taken to his summer home in New York and remained unconscious for 3 months. He returned to naval service in 1862 as a captain of the USS Monitor, another Monitor-type ironclad. The old Rebs were all celebrating what they considered a victory, as crowds of spectators gathered along the banks of the Elizabeth River, cheering and waving flags, handkerchiefs, and hats at the Virginia, displaying the captured ensign of Congress, passed along up the river. The Confederate government was ecstatic, immediately promoted Buchanan to admiral.
Oh, look at him. Both the Union and Confederacy soon came up with plans for defeating the other's ironclad. Oddly, these did not depend on their own ironclads. The Union Navy chartered a large ship, which was the side-wheeler USS Vanderbilt, and reinforced her bow with steel specifically to be used as a naval ram, provided Virginia steam far enough out into Hampton Roads. April 11th, the Virginia, accompanied by a number of gunboats, steamed into Hampton Roads to Sewell's Point at the southeast edge, almost over to Newport News, in a challenge to lure Monitor into battle. Said, "We want a rematch."
The Virginia fired a few shots ineffectively at a very long range while the Monitor returned fire, remaining near Fort Monroe. ready to fight if Virginia came to attack the federal force congregated there. Furthermore, the old Vanderbilt was in position to ram Virginia if she approached the fort, but Virginia did not even take the bait. In a further attempt to entice Monitor closer to the Confederate side so she could be boarded, the James River Squadron moved in and captured 3 merchant ships, the brigs Marcus and Sabot, and the schooner Catherine T. Dix.
Well, these had been grounded and abandoned when they sighted Virginia entering the roads. Their flags were then hoisted Union side down to taunt Monitor into a fight as they were towed back to Norfolk. In the end, both sides had failed to provoke a fight on their terms. The Confederate Navy originally had devised a plan by which the James River Squadron would swarm Monitor with a party of men to board and capture the vessel, disable her by using heavy hammers to drive iron wedges under and disable the turret, and by covering the pilot house with a wet sail, effectively blinding the pilot. Right.
Others would throw combustibles down the ventilation openings and smoke holes. At one point, Jones made such an attempt to board that vessel, but she managed to slip away around the stern of the Virginia in time. There was a second confrontation on the 8th of May when the Virginia came out, while the Monitor and 4 other federal ships bombarded the Confederate batteries at Sewell's Point. The federal ships retired slowly to Fort Monroe, hoping to lure Virginia into the roads. She did not follow, and after firing a gun to windward as a sign of contempt, anchored off Sewell's Point. Later, when the old Rebs abandoned Norfolk on the 11th of May of 1862, they were forced to destroy the Virginia.
Wasted. Well, after the destruction of the Virginia, Monitor was free to assist the Union Army and General McClellan's campaign against Richmond. As the Navy always gave command to officers based on seniority, Greene was replaced with Lieutenant Thomas O. Selfridge the day after the battle. 2 days later, Selfridge was in turn relieved by Lieutenant William Nicholson Jeffers, May 15, 1862. Monitor was then now part of a flotilla under the command of Admiral John Rodgers aboard the Galena, and along with 3 other gunboats steamed up the James River and engaged the Confederate batteries at Drury's Bluff.
The force had instructions to coordinate their efforts with McClellan's forces on land and push on towards Richmond to bombard the city and to surrender if possible. Without any assistance, the task force got within 8 miles of the Confederate capital, but could not proceed any further because of sunken vessels and debris placed in the river that blocked further passage. There were also artillery batteries at Fort Darling, overlooking and guarding the approach, along with other heavy guns and sharpshooters positioned along the river banks along the way.
The fort was strategically situated on the west bank of the James River atop a bluff about 200 feet above and overlooking the bend in the river. Monitor was of little help in the assault because the confinement and small gun ports of her turret would not allow her to elevate her guns sufficiently to engage the Confederate batteries at close range, so she had to fall back and fire at a greater distance. While the other gunboats, they were unable to overcome the fortifications on their own. Yeah,
it usually happens. After Monitor received only a few hits without incurring any damage, the Confederates, many of whom were former crew members of the Virginia, well aware of her ability to withstand cannon shot even at close range, they concentrated their guns on the other ships, especially the Galena, which sustained considerable damage and moderate casualties. After a near 4-hour artillery duel and sustaining numerous hits overall, the flotilla was unable to neutralize the fortifications, and they had to turn back. Not one single Union ship reached Richmond until near the end of the war, when the city was finally evacuated by the old Confederates.
After the Battle of Drury's Bluff, Monitor remained on the James River providing support, along with the Galena and other gunboats, to McClellan's troops at various points along the river, including Harrison's Landing, which ended in August. However, most of the time spent on the river was marked with inactivity and hot weather, which had a negative effect on the morale of Monitor's crew. Yeah, you're in a freaking tin box. Iron. During the long, hot summer, several crew members became sick and were transferred to Hampton Roads, while various other officers were replaced, including Newton, while Jeffers was replaced by Commander Thomas Stevens, Jr. on the 15th of August.
By the end of August, Monitor was ordered back to Hampton Roads and dropped anchor nearby the sunken Cumberland at Newport News Point on the 30th of August. Much to the approval of the crew, Monitor's sole purpose now was to blockade the James River from any advances made by the newly constructed Virginia II, which was an ironclad ram.
September, Captain John Bankhead received orders to take command of Monitor, relieved Stevens, and was sent to Hampton Roads to take charge of the vessel. Shortly after Bankhead assumed command, Monitor's engines and boilers were condemned by a board of survey which recommended that they be overhauled completely. 30th September, the ironclad was sent to the Washington Navy Yard for repairs, which they arrived on the 3rd of October.
Upon arrival at Washington, Monitor and her crew were greeted by a crowd of thousands of cheering admirers once again, who came to see the ship that saved the nation. Monitor was now a premier tourist attraction, and the crowd was soon allowed on board to tour the vessel. During this very time, the vessel was picked clean of artifacts for souvenirs by the touring civilians that came. When Stoddard and others came to close up the dock and ship, one evening, Stoddard noted, "When we came up to clean that night, there was not a key or a doorknob or an escutcheon. There wasn't a thing that hadn't been carried away."
Before Monitor was put in dry dock for repairs, Lincoln, Fox, and various other officials and a few of Worden's close friends, they arrived to ceremoniously review the vessel and pay respect to the crew and former Commander Worden, who, after a long and partial recovery, arrived for the occasion. Entire Army regiments were also directed to come by the Navy Yard to review the ship and honor the crew. Monitor's crew assembled on deck in formation with their officers in front, while Lincoln, Fox, and other guests stood near the turret.
When Worden, with the first part of his face blackened from the wounds he received at Hampton Roads, came aboard, the heavy guns in the Navy Yard were fired in salute. Lincoln came forward and greeted Worden, and then introduced him to some of the others. After his formal greeting, the crew swarmed around Worden and embraced and shook hands with their former commander, and thanked God for his recovery and return. Worden called each of them by name and spoke friendly to and complimented each of them personally. When order was restored, the president gave a short speech about Worden's career. Oh, cool.
At Fox's request, Worden gave a speech as well to the gathering about his voyage from New York to Hampton Roads, the trials they were faced with along the way, and of the great battle between the Monitor and Virginia, while also paying tribute to many of the officers and men involved. In closing, he gave special thanks to Erickson, Lincoln, Wells, and all who made construction of Monitor possible. Oh.
While the Monitor was undergoing repairs, her crew was put aboard the USS King Philip and were eventually granted a furlough by Bankhead, who himself went on leave. For approximately 6 weeks, the vessel remained in dry dock while her bottom was scraped clean. The engines and boilers were overhauled. The entire vessel was clean and painted, and a number of improvements made, including an iron shield around the top of the turret. To make the vessel more seaworthy, a 30-foot funnel-shaped smokestack was placed over the smoke outlet, while taller fresh air vents were installed.
The berth deck below was also enlarged and raised by removing some of the side storerooms and placing them below, thus reducing the height of the interior, which now barely allowed the crew to stand upright. Several cranes were also added while interior improvements were made, making the confining environment more livable. A large blower that operated with its own engine was installed, which drew fresh air down through the pilot house. During this time, the 2 Dahlgren guns were each engraved with large letters, Monitor and Merrimack Worden, and Monitor and Merrimack Erickson, respectively.
Okay. Additional iron plates were installed covering the dents from the previous battles. Each plate was inscribed with the name of the source from where the shell causing the dent was made. Example was Merrimack, Fort Darling, etc. Stanchions were also installed around the perimeter of the freeboard, with a rope strung through each, making it safer to walk about the deck amid stormy weather and rough seas. I mean, walking on that deck anyway, motherfuckers. Monitor was finally taken out of dry dock on the 26th of October. By November, the ship was fully repaired and ready to return to service.
Well, it wouldn't go back to service until about December 24th, 1862, when orders were issued directing the Monitor to Beaufort, North Carolina, to join the USS Passaic and the USS Montauk for a joint Army-Navy expedition against Wilmington, North Carolina, where she would join the blockade of Charleston. The orders were received by the crew on Christmas Day, some of whom had been aboard Monitor on her harrowing journey from New York to Hampton Roads in March. They were not pleased with the prospect of taking to the high seas once again. Dana Green remarked, "I do not consider this steamer a seagoing vessel." Well, they put the stack on there. It's supposed to help it.
Well, the crew celebrated Christmas aboard Monitor, while berthed at Hampton Roads in what was described as the most merry fashion, while many other celebrations were occurring along the shore as well. The ship's cook was paid $1 to prepare a meal for the crew befitting the day. It was received with mixed opinion. Just eat the shit, motherfuckers.
Right.
That very day, Monitor was made ready for sea, her crew under strict orders not to discuss the impending voyage with anyone. But bad weather delayed her departure until the 29th of December.
All right. While the design of the Monitor was well suited for river combat, her low freeboard and heavy turret made her highly unseaworthy in rough waters. Under the command of John Bankhead, Monitor put to sea anyway on December 31st, under tow from the steamship USS Rhode Island, and just as a heavy storm developed off of Cape Hatteras, North Carolina.
Uh-oh.
Using chalk and a blackboard, Bankhead wrote messages alerting Rhode Island that if Monitor needed help, she would signal with a red lantern.
Well, the Monitor was soon in trouble as the storm increased in ferocity. Large waves were splashing over and completely covering the deck and the pilot house, so the crew temporarily rigged their wheel atop the turret, which was manned by helmsman Francis Butts. Water continued flooding into the vents and the ports, and the ship began rolling uncontrollably in the high seas. Sometimes she would drop into a wave with such force the entire hull would tremble. Leaks were beginning to appear everywhere.
Oh, no. Bankhead ordered the engineers to start the Worthington pumps, which temporarily stemmed the rising waters, but soon Monitor was hit by a squall and a series of violent waves. Water continued to work its way into the vessel. Right when the Worthington pump could no longer keep pace with the flooding, a call came from the engine room that water was gaining there. Realizing the ship was in serious trouble, Bankhead signaled Rhode Island for help and hoisted the red lantern next to the Monitor's white running light atop the turret. Oh, you probably don't want to do that.
Oh, man. He then ordered the anchor dropped to stop the ship's rolling and pitching with little effect, making it no easier for the rescue boats to get close enough to rescue her crew. He then ordered the tow line cut and called for volunteers. Stoddard, along with crewmates John Stocking and James Fenwick, they volunteered, and they climbed down from the turret. But eyewitnesses said that as soon as they were on the deck, Fenwick and Stocking were quickly swept overboard, and they drowned. Oh, man. Stoddard managed to hang on to safety lines around the deck and finally cut through the 13-inch tow line with a hatchet.
Jeez. About 11:30 p.m., Bankhead ordered the engineers to stop engines and divert all available steam to the large Adams centrifugal steam pump. But with reduced steam output from a boiler being fed wet coal, it too was unable to stem the rapidly rising water. After all the steam pumps failed, Bankhead ordered some of the crew to man the hand pumps and organize a bucket brigade, but to no avail.
Man, you're done, bud. Green and Stoddard were among the last men to abandon the ship and remained with Bankhead, who was the last surviving man to abandon the sinking Monitor. In his official report of Monitor to the Navy Department, Bankhead praised Green and Stoddard for their heroic efforts, and he wrote, "I would beg leave to call the attention of the Admiral and of the Department of the particularly good conduct of Lieutenant Green and Acting Master Louis Stoddard, who remained with me until the last, and by their example did much toward inspiring confidence and obedience on the part of the others."
After a frantic rescue effort, Monitor finally capsized and sank stern first, approximately 16 miles southeast off of Cape Hatteras with the loss of 16 men, including 4 officers, some of whom remained in the turret, which detached as the ship capsized. 47 men were rescued by the lifeboats from Rhode Island. Bankhead, Green, and Stoddard barely managed to get clear of the sinking vessel and survive the ordeal, but they suffered from exposure from the icy winter sea.
Yeah. After his initial recovery, Bankhead filed his official report, as did the commanding officers of the Rhode Island. State officers and men of both Monitor and Rhode Island did everything within their ability to keep the Monitor from sinking. The Navy did not even find it necessary to commission a board of inquiry to investigate the affair and took no action against Bankhead or any officer because they knew.
What are you supposed to do?
They knew this ship wasn't even supposed to be where it was at.
Well, sometime later, a controversy emerged over why Monitor sank. In the Army and Navy Journal, Erickson accused the crew of drunkenness during the storm, being consequently unable to prevent the vessel from sinking. Stoddard vigorously defended the crew and rebuked Erickson's characterization of the crew and events, and wrote to Pearson that Erickson covers up defects by blaming those who are now dead, pointing out that there are a number of unavoidable events and circumstances that led to the ship sinking. Foremost being the overhang between the upper and lower hulls, which came loose and partially separated during the storm from slamming into the violent waves. Stoddard's account was corroborated by other shipmates. Right, Erickson, you weren't even there, you pussy.
Dummy. The Navy tested an underwater locator in August of 1949 by searching an area south of the Cape Hatteras Lighthouse for the wreck of the Monitor. It found a 140-foot-long object bulky enough to be a shipwreck and 310 feet of water that was thought to be the Monitor. but powerful currents negated attempts by divers to investigate. Retired Rear Admiral Edward Ellsberg proposed using external pontoons to raise the wreck in 1951, the same method of marine salvage he had used on the sunken submarine S-51 for the cost of $250,000. 4 years later, Robert Marks claimed to have discovered the wreck based on the idea she had drifted into shallow water north of the lighthouse before sinking. Marks said he had dived on the wreck and placed a Coke bottle with his name on it in one of the gun's barrels, although he never provided any proof of his story.
Okay. Interest in locating the ship revived in the early 70s, and Duke University, the National Geographic Society, and the National Science Foundation sponsored an expedition in August of 73 to go search for the wreck using a towed sonar system. The Duke team was led by John Newton. No known relation to the Isaac Newton that served on the Monitor, though. That'd be cool if it was. 27th of August, Monitor was discovered almost 111 years after sinking near Cape Hatteras at 230 feet depth. Damn.
They sent a camera down.
Does iron rust?
Maybe. They sent a camera down to photograph the wreck, but the pictures were so fuzzy and they were useless. On a second attempt, the camera snagged something on the wreck and was lost. The sonar images did not even match what they expected the wreck to look like until they realized that the sinking vessel had turned over while descending and was resting at the bottom upside down. Oh. The team announced the discovery on the 8th of March, 1974.
Oh, cool. Another expedition was mounted that same month to confirm the discovery, and the research sub Alcoa Sea Probe was able to take still photos and video of the wreck that confirmed it was indeed the Monitor. These photos revealed that the wreck was disintegrating, and the discovery raised another issue. Since the Navy had formally abandoned the wreck in 1953, it could be exploited by divers and private salvage companies as it lay outside North Carolina's territorial limits, which I'm sure somebody found and didn't say nothing.
Right. To preserve the ship, the wreck, and everything around it, a half a nautical mile radius was designated as the Monitor National Marine Sanctuary, the first United States Marine Sanctuary. And that was the 30th of January, 1975. Monitor was also designated a National Historic Landmark on the 23rd of June, 1986. In 1977, scientists were finally able to view the wreckage in person as the submersible Johnson Sea Link was used to inspect it.
Well, the Sea Link was able to ferry divers down to the sunken vessel and retrieve small artifacts. U.S. Navy interest in raising the entire ship ended in 1978 when Captain Willard Searle Jr. calculated the cost and possible damage expected from the operation. He said it's going to take about $20 million just to stabilize the vessel, or as much as $50 million to bring all of it to the surface.
Like that.
Research continued and artifacts continued to be recovered, including the ship's 1,500-pound anchor in 1983. The growing number of relics required conservation and a proper home, so the U.S. National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, in charge of all U.S. marine sanctuaries, they selected Mariners Museum March 9, 1987, after they considered proposals from several other institutions.
Initial efforts 1995 by Navy and NOAA divers to raise the warship's propeller were foiled by an abnormally stormy season off Cape Hatteras. Realizing that raising the whole wreck was impractical for financial reasons, as well as the inability to bring up the wreck intact, the NOAA developed a comprehensive plan to recover most of the significant parts of the ship, namely her engine, propeller, guns, and the turret. Estimated that the plan would cost over $20 million to implement over 4 years. Why? Just leave it there. It's a waste of money.
I mean, the guns would be cool. Well, the Department of Defense Legacy Resource Management Program, they contributed $14.5 million. The Navy divers, mainly from its 2 mobile diving and salvage units, would perform the bulk of the work necessary in order to train in deep sea conditions and evaluate new equipment. Another effort to raise Monitor's propeller was successful this time on June 8, 1998. Although the amount of effort required to work in the difficult conditions off of the Cape Hatteras, it was underestimated, and the fewer than 30 divers used were nearly overwhelmed.
The 1999 dive season was mostly research-orientated, as divers investigated the wreck in detail, planning how to recover the engine, and determining if they could even stabilize the hull so that it would not collapse onto the turret. In 2000, the divers shored up. The divers shored up the port side of the hull with bags of grout, installed the engine recovery system, an external framework to which the engine would be attached in preparation for the next season. And they made over 5 times as many dives as they had the previous season.
All right, go to 2001. That dive season concentrated on raising the ship's steam engine and condenser. Hull plates had to be removed to access the engine compartment. Both the engine and the condenser had to be separated from the ship, the surrounding wreckage, and each other. A mini rover ROV, it was used to provide visibility of the wreck and divers to the support staff above water. The engine was raised July 16th, and the condenser 3 days later by the crane barge Wotan.
Jeez. All right. Saturation diving was evaluated by the Navy that dive season on the Monitor and proved to be very successful, allowing divers to maximize their time on the bottom. The surface supplied divers evaluated the use of helix due to the depth of the wreck. It also proved to be successful once the dive tables were adjusted. Okay.
Much like the previous year, the 2002 dive season was dedicated to lifting the 120 long-ton turret to the surface. Around 160 divers this time were assigned to remove the parts of the hull, including the armor belt that lay on top of the turret using chisels, exothermic cutting torches, they're doing this underwater, and 20,000 psi hydroblasters. They removed as much of the debris from inside the turret as possible to reduce the weight to be lifted.
This was usually concreted coal, as one of the ship's coal bunkers had ruptured and dumped most of its contents into the turret. The divers prepared the turret roof for the first stage of the lift by excavating underneath the turret and placed steel beams and angle irons to reinforce it for its move onto a lifting platform for the second stage. So much work.
A large 8-legged lifting frame, nicknamed the Spider, was carefully positioned over the turret to move it onto the platform, and the entire affair would be lifted by the crane mounted on the Wotan. The divers discovered one skeleton in the turret on July 26th before the lift and spent a week carefully chipping about half of it free of the concreted debris. The other half was inaccessible underneath the rear of one of the guns.
Well, you had Tropical Storm Cristobal bearing down on the recovery team, and time and money were running out. The team made the decision to raise the turret on the 5th of August, 2002, after 41 days of work. And the gun turret broke the surface at 5:30 p.m. to the cheers of everyone on board and other recovery ships nearby. As archaeologists examined the contents of the turret after it had been landed aboard the Wotan, they discovered a second skeleton, but removing it did not begin until the turret arrived at the Mariners Museum for conservation.
Creepy.
All right.
Well, the remains of these sailors were transferred to the Joint POW MIA Accountant Command at Hickam Air Force Base in Hawaii in the hope that they could be identified. Only 16 of the crew were not rescued by Rhode Island before Monitor sank, and the forensic anthropologists at JPAC, they were able to rule out the 3 missing black crewmen based on the shape of the femurs and skulls. Among the most promising of the 16 candidates were crew members Jacob Nicholas, Robert Williams, and William Bryan, but a decade passed without their identities being discovered. March 8, 2013, the remains were buried at Arlington National Cemetery with full military honors.
Nice. 2003, NOAA divers and volunteers returned to the Monitor with the goal of obtaining an overall video of the site to create a permanent record of the current conditions of the wreck after the turret recovery. Jeff Johnston of the Monitor National Marine Sanctuary also wanted a definitive image of the vessel's pilot house. During the dives, the Monitor's iron pilot house was located near the bow of the vessel and documented for the very first time by videographer Rick Allen of Nautilus Productions in its inverted position, upside down.
Conservation of the propeller was completed nearly 3 years after its recovery, and it is now on display in the Monitor Center at the Mariners Museum. As 2013, conservation of the engine, its components, the turret, and the guns continues. The Dahlgren guns were removed from the turret in September 2004 and placed in their own conservation tanks. Among some of the artifacts recovered from the sunken vessel was a red signal lantern, which is possibly the one used to send a distress signal to Rhode Island, and the last thing to be seen before Monitor sank in 1862. It was the first object recovered from the site in 1977 as well. Oh, wow. Fitting. A gold wedding band was also recovered from the hand of the skeletal remains on one of the Monitor's crew members found in the turret.
Oh, wow. Northrop Grumman Shipyard in Newport News constructed a full-scale, non-seaworthy static replica of Monitor. The replica was laid down on February 2005 and completed just 2 months later on the grounds of the Mariners Museum. The Monitor National Marine Sanctuary conducts occasional dives on the wreck to monitor and record any changes in its condition and its environment.
A lot of money wasted. The Greenpoint Monitor Monument in McGrawlerick Park, Brooklyn, depicts a sailor from the Monitor pulling on a capstan. Sculptor Antonio Di Filippo was commissioned by the state of New York in the 30s for a bronze statue to commemorate the Battle of Hampton Roads, John Erickson, and the crew of the ship. It was dedicated the 6th of November, 1938. A vandal, guess what, doused it with white paint January 7th, 2013.
Well, of course they did, because they're fucking idiots. 1995, the United States Postal Service issued a stamp commemorating U.S. Monitor and the CSS Virginia, depicting the two ships while engaged in their famous battle at Hampton Roads. The 150th anniversary of the ship's loss prompted several events in commemoration. A memorial to Monitor and her lost crew members were erected in the Civil War section of Hampton National Cemetery by the NOAA's Office of National Marine Sanctuaries, together with the U.S. Navy and the United States Departments of Veteran Affairs. And it was dedicated on the 29th of December 2012, that very day where they should never went out in 1862.
Man. The Greenpoint Monitor Museum commemorated the ship and her crew with an event on January 12, 2013, which is at the grave sites of those Monitor crew members buried in Greenwood Cemetery in Brooklyn, followed by a service in the cemetery's chapel. New Jersey-based indie rock band Titus Andronicus, they named their critically acclaimed second album, 2010's The Monitor, for the ship. Cool. Featured on the album sleeve are the crewmen of Monitor, taken from a tintype portrait.
Oh, nice. The album's interwoven references to the Civil War include speeches and writings from the period, as well as the sidelong closing track, The Battle of Hampton Roads. The latter refers to the Monitor's encounter with the CSS Virginia in prominent detail. Singer-guitarist Patrick Stickles, he commented while making the album that he was inspired by Ken Burns' Civil War and the ship itself so much that he decided to name Titus Andronicus' second album in its honor.
Good for you, buddy. Monitor gave her name to a new type of massless, low freeboard warship that mounted its armament and turrets. Many more were built, including river monitors, and they played key roles in the Civil War battles on the Mississippi and James Rivers. The breastwork monitor was developed during the 1860s by Sir Edward Reed, chief constructor of the Royal Navy, as an improvement of the basic monitor design.
Reed gave these ships a superstructure to increase seaworthiness and raised the freeboard of the gun turrets so they could be worked in all weathers. The superstructure was armored to protect the bases of the turrets, the funnels, and the ventilator ducts, in what he termed as a breastwork. The ships were conceived as harbor defense ships with little need to leave port. Reed took advantage of the lack of masts and designed the ships with one twin gun turret at each end of the superstructure, each able to turn and fire in a 270-degree arc.
These ships were described by Admiral George Alexander Ballard as being like full armored knights riding on donkeys, easy to avoid but bad to close with. Reed later developed the design into the Devastation class, which was the first ocean-going turret ships without masts, the direct ancestors of the pre-dreadnought battleships and the dreadnoughts.
Okay. All right. Well, this very battle between the Monitor and the Confederate ironclad CSS Virginia was reenacted using scale models in 1936 film Hearts in Bondage from Republic Pictures. The battle was also dramatized in the 1991 made-for-TV movie Ironclads, produced by, you guessed it, Ted Turner himself.
Ted Turner loved his Civil War stuff, did he?
Hulk Hogan was the admiral.
All right, cool.
There's that.
That's the Monitor. Taking it out unnecessarily got it sunk. But, yep, that's the Monitor. Next week we'll return to originally scheduled programming and probably do another profile of somebody. Probably, most likely, I don't know, a rebel guy, maybe.
We'll see.
Maybe Jeb, or maybe Chamberlain, or Longstreet, somebody. Either or, we'll be back for more Behind the Battles as we got a lot more stuff behind the battles to get to. So we'll see you next week on Battles of the American Civil War. We are the Monthly Music Industry.
Bang, bang.